Hey guys, I am finally going home from my vacation, unfortunately. I'm at the train station waiting for it to take me to the airport. And while I do that, I've got a good bit of time. So I'm going to go over our last two lessons together. So these two lessons here are a little bit longer. It's covering a lot of art history that is more modern that I feel like you'll probably enjoy more. But it is a lot more content than we have been going into with art history. Um, Typically, I would divide these lessons into 2 days probably. So just expect each of these videos to be about 15-ish minutes long. And there will probably be four of them, I would say. So let's go ahead and get started. Alrighty, so lesson 17 is on our modern art movements. And so really we pick right back up where we were at our last lesson where we stopped at Romanticism. And we're going to pick up with Impressionism. But first, we're going to kind of go through what time period this reflects, some things that influenced modern art, because it is this really huge shift in why, like the desire for art, the purpose of art. So let's just look at the time frame first. So we're in the late 1800s to mid 20th century during this. So like late 80s, I would say 1870s at the earliest. And then this goes all the way up to probably like 1970s-ish. So it's a really big chunk of time, and a lot of movements come out of this. So modernism arose from a desire to break away from tradition and reflect the modern age. And some influences for that were industrialization, which is just the really rapid speed of which the world is changing. New technology is being put out there, bigger buildings, more knowledge, essentially. So I would say new technologies, though, is probably the biggest influence when it comes to art, and that being especially at the start of modernism, because we have the camera that becomes a more common tool than having like a portrait taken, or portrait painted. So this need for art sort of shifts, and artists are sort of met at like a crossroads of like, how do we proceed from here? I talked way back when we went over painting, how painting has had a lot of near-death experiences, and this is probably the most impactful one, because the need for art, what we were painting, what the art subject was, really had to change to continue being relevant. Because the logic was here that, if you could have your picture taken with a camera, why would you need to pay somebody to paint your portrait? And that was what the sort of like commission was for, hundreds of years before that for artists. So let's look through a few that we're going to talk about. We've got Impressionism, Cubism, Fauvism, Expressionism, Dadaism, Surrealism, Abstract Expressionism, and much more. A lot of isms in there. And something interesting with this like segment of art history as well is that when we have like, if we look back at like Renaissance, Baroque, Rococo, these like giant periods that go, 100, 150 years, modern art is like a lot of these are happening simultaneously by different groups of artists. A lot of them are very, very short periods, and like they're only kind of deemed like, Fauvism, for example, only lasts 2 years. It's like 1905 to 1907. So it's just a lot of overlap and a lot of change is happening, more change than has ever happened in art history in the Western world. So there's a lot to kind of take in with this lesson. All right, so breaking from the past, there's a reaction against academic art and realism because of obvious reasons. We have the invention of cameras now, so we have to add something more to our paintings than it just being a realistic representation of someone. There's an emphasis on personal perspective, abstraction, and experimentation. So a lot of just like trial and error, basically. Artists are just like, we've never had this opportunity to just make things, and just see how people react to them. And so this is a lot of that too. Some is just, experimental, like we, try it and maybe it doesn't work, or maybe a certain group likes it and then we kind of move on. Artists also challenge traditional aesthetics, techniques, and subject matter. So we're going to see a lot of different types of subject matter, some non-representational, which is just like pure, like not in any reference to the natural world, and a lot of abstraction as well. So it's not portraying the world in a very natural way. There's some way that it's been distorted or made, just exaggerated, any kind of variant of those things. There's also a rise of new media, collage photography, and found object art. So we're going to talk about a lot of those as well. And photography is an interesting one. We've already kind of talked about that. But while at first artists really rejected the idea of photography, and even more so, just like the common person would reject the idea of photography being a art form, it started to sort of integrate itself after a while. And these like art photographers started to emerge that weren't just interested in capturing something exactly the way it was. They were trying to, have a vision just like any other type of artist. All right, so let's start with Impressionism because this is the one that really shifts us into modern art. And this is going to occur right after Romanticism. So if we remember back on that, we're kind of already exploring a few things like Impressionism sort of values in Romanticism. There's a lot of loose brushwork. Things aren't, these clean, structured lines. There's a lot of sort of expressive use of color and so forth. Not as realistic as things have been in the past. So it aimed, though, the main goal of Impressionism was to capture the fleeting effects of light and atmosphere in everyday life. So these moments of like transition, like, feeling the wind or the light like flickering across the water or steam rising from an engine. Those are things that are just a fleeting moment. And so these artists that, were trying to kind of break outside of photography started trying to capture these things that photography couldn't really capture with this loose brushwork, with this exaggerated color, etc. Artists also painted outdoors, and it was called in plein air or plein air paintings to observe natural changes in real time. So they would experience the, sun going down or the sun rising or, the wind blowing and like the clouds going in the sky. All of those types of things is what they would observe and try to capture them through paint. We see a lot of loose, quick brushstrokes and bright optical color mixing. You'll see that in this one. This is Claude Monet's Sunrise, and it's sort of Impression Sunrise is the full name of it. And it really encapsulates everything that Impressionist artists were trying to achieve. So this exaggeration, especially, we've got this moment of a sun rising where everything is sort of still calm and like almost has like a blue tint to it. But if you were just to take a photograph, it might not look like that blue tint, but you can kind of see it and like observe it. And then that, orange sun as it's rising, just those few little moments when it's coming up, it's just this big orange ball that if you have ever tried to take a picture of that, probably doesn't reflect the way it actually looked in the moment. And so these Impressionist painters were trying to achieve that through exaggerating, like, really subduing the background color and like sort of highlighting it with some blue and then contrasting that blue with very, very vibrant orange that was a pure hue. So it wasn't mixed into a tint or a shade. The scenes that are depicted are often of modern day leisure, landscapes, and urban life rather than history or mythology or just like portraiture that, we became so uh, familiar with throughout history. But a lot of these also were paintings that were done, the plein air paintings. They were very quick paintings. They weren't taking, days and days and days to do. And so this was a really good way to sort of like sell people souvenirs and things like if they were at the beach or at the lake or at, any of like these sort of vacationy spots, a lot of artists would sell their work and sort of cater to that audience of people that were, the kind of upper class that wanted artwork, like real artwork still, but maybe didn't want to, pay however much to have their portrait made. And again, this Monet's Impression Sunrise, the painting gave Impressionism its name, and it embodies the movement's interest in capturing a fleeting moment, atmosphere, and painterly spontaneity. Even the little brushstrokes across the water there, that really feels like the way it sort of, flickers across the water there. Really, really just captures this movement. Oh, and it's 1860s. I would say like really probably 1870s until the 1880s. And I would say on the later half of the 1880s, probably. All right, now we have post-impressionism, which goes from 1885 to 1910. And it's a lot like impressionism. These ideas weren't too far removed from what the original impressionism was, but it had more of like a personal, like stylized effect to it. It built upon impressionism, but pushed further towards emotion, structure, and meaning. So less about just like capturing a single moment, but more focused on personal vision and symbolic content. So we have a lot of like stylized artists during post-impressionism, like Van Gogh, which is one of our most well-known painters in our, Western art history entirely. And he has a very specific style and probably was one of the first people during this period to develop that just like really curated way of depicting scenes and landscapes. Techniques really varied. Some use structure forms like Paul Cézanne, others use pointillism like Seurat, or intense emotional expression like Van Gogh. We'll see much bolder, sometimes non-naturalistic color and composition. In The Starry Night, which is by Van Gogh, it was painted in 1889. It really encaptures both the original impressionist idea of capturing sort of a fleeting moment, but really having this personal touch to it as well. I love the way that Van Gogh uses his little short brush strokes here to create this like wind motion sort of feeling. It almost feels like a chilly, night or very crisp night, like clear night sky, where you're really kind of, I don't know, it really takes you there. It makes you feel like these stars are really kind of interacting with you, and the moon is, really that bright. So yeah, it's a really powerfully emotion evoking painting, I would say. All right, so Fauvism. This is one of our really short movements. I'm not sure why it says to 1910. I guess you could extend it a little bit, but typically you would say it was 1905 to 1907, but 1910 is fine too. These are known as the wild beast of color. So it was a very short-lived but very influential movement, emphasizing pure, vibrant color and emotional expression. So when it says pure, vibrant color, that just means that there are no tints and shades. It's just very saturated, very bold use of color. And sometimes even like intuitive color, which is like, for example, on this painting here, there's green along the face and some like blue tones and things that are on the chin there. And so that's, creating sort of a shadow effect as well. But also, obviously, this is an artist's choice rather than how something actually looked, sort of just to bring the whole piece together. And the name is Fauvism. This comes from the French word fauves, that means wild beast. It's a term that critics use to mock the artist's shocking color choices. So Fauvism was really rejected for a very, very long time before it kind of grew in acceptance. And so these artists that were practicing this type of art making sort of just separated themselves entirely and just started kind of experimenting with this use of color. But this is a kind of good time to mention too during this period, sort of, early modernism, our sort of focus is on the French Salon, which is this big, like, art exhibition, basically. And if you are a well-known artist or you're a very, like, you want to be known, like you want your name to be known, you want to submit your work to this French Salon in France. And if you are accepted into it, then that is sort of like the what's popular at the time. And so the Fauvist artists, they were submitting their work to this and getting rejected, and then they would be in other galleries as well, and they would just be kind of sort of laughed at because of how ridiculous they really were for the time, or people thought that they were. So we'll also see simplified forms, bold outlines, and flat use of space, often decorative and joyful through though deeply psychological for some artists. It's very highly influenced by the post-impressionist and non-Western art forms, especially African and oceanic sculpture. So really kind of pushing that abstraction like as far as it'll go, or for the time. We're going beyond impressionism, going beyond post-impressionism, and really sort of tapping into something that has never been done before. This is Woman with a Hat by Henri Matisse, who was one of the sort of like most well known of the Fauvists. And he's very well known today. A lot of his prints and paintings and things are super, super popular, even like on a commercial level. This jarring combination of bright greens, purples, and oranges shocks traditional expectation, using colors not to describe but to evoke feeling, which is a central idea and goal for Fauvist artists. All right. So our German Expressionism, that is another big movement of the time. It goes on from 1905 to 1925, and it sees art as an inner experience. So German Expressionism prioritized subjective experience over visual accuracy, channeling emotion, trauma, and social critique. So it sort of is taking a lot of the ideas from Fauvism, I would say, and Post-Impressionism. They employed the bold lines, distorted forms, and jarring color to express inner tension. Deeply influenced by Nietzsche philosophy, urban alienation, and emerging psychological theories. So it's very tapped into other art forms as well, not just the visual arts, but also psychology like theory, writing, poetry, all of those things. It rejected industrialization and materialism and embraced spiritual, primal, or emotional truths. And this is Street Berlin by Ernest Ludwig Kirchner, done in 1913. And we see here this elongated, mask-like faces and clashing colors that create a sense of alienation in a modern crowd, capturing the psychological strain of urban life. So this is a very typical painting that you might see where it's figurative, and a lot of the German Expressionism was figurative, but it was, very much about sort of the psychological effect that like it's trying to depict. All right, and now we've got Cubism, and I think we're gonna go. Well, we'll go through a few more. We've got Cubism, which is from 1907 to 1925, and it is all about deconstructing vision. So we're just pushing and pushing and pushing how far we can kind of take abstract art before it gets just totally rejected. And sometimes it gets totally rejected, and then we still keep pushing it. This is invented or sort of founded by Pablo Picasso and Jorge Braque. Um, Cubism fractured form and reassembled it multiple viewpoints. It sought to depict the essence of objects over time, not just in one moment from a single angle. So what that means is that we are really kind of breaking things down to like this geometric sort of simplification, and sort of collaging these different angles of an object, or a lot of the times it was figures like we see here, and sort of overlapping them into one image. So it kind of feels like there's this movement involved because there's so many different angles of the same scene sort of overlapping with each other. It's divided into two phases. We see analytical cubism, which is what is probably more common that you would know. It's fragmented monochrome analysis of form. And this is an example of analytical cubism where it's just it's not it's still painting, but it's really about that fragmentation, that viewing things from different angles, different sides. Um, and yeah, and then we have synthetic cubism, which introduced color, texture, and mixed media like newspaper and wallpaper. And this is very cutting edge as well. We don't really see a lot of like mixed media use, a lot of collage use at all, really before this time period. But it's really interesting, and it kind of brings in this early idea of found object in artwork, where you might find, cardboard or little scraps of paper and kind of combine them all into one image. It also profoundly influenced architecture, graphic design, and abstract art for a long time to come. People really argue that Cubism is one of the most influential movements of art history. This is Les Deux Amels d'Avignon by Pablo Picasso, and it is done in 1907. It's a really early Cubism piece. So Picasso shatters traditional figure painting by presenting five nudes as flat planes and fractured mask, blending Iberian and African influence with radical geometry. Now, this is just my kind of personal stance on Cubism, and I think I've maybe mentioned it before already, maybe like when we talked about Kehinde Wiley. But Cubism was a movement that was very much borrowed without credit from African art, which is considered non-Western art. So Picasso, who was a Spanish artist, traveled down to Africa and stayed there for a while and did a lot of painting, kind of explored with style. And he noticed that, these African artists were doing the style of painting that was just totally foreign to the Western, culture that we had. And so a lot of this is like, if you were in an African artist, this is the type of artwork you would have been making already for, hundreds of years, and had at one point in time been labeled like primitive or, just underdeveloped. not serious art. But now we're taking it, this, this European guy is taking it and bringing it back. And he's like, hey, I invented this thing and it's like the right time to present it and blah, blah, blah. But it's very much a borrowing without permission or without credit from a different culture's art traditions. All right, Futurism is our next movement. It goes from 1909 to 1918, and it is art of speed and modernity. So, Futurism is all about sort of like transportation and speed and motion and trying to capture those ideas. It originated in Italy. Futurism glorified the machine age, celebrating speed, power, violence, and technology. So they're just really, really fully embracing it. While some art movements are like, no, we don't want to touch this. They're like, no, we want to make art all about this. It's heavily influenced by Cubism's fragmentation, but focused on movement and force. So using that fragmentation to kind of show movement. Artists aim to express a dynamicism of modern life from racing cars to industrial cities. So a lot of the subject matter is about transportation. It's about movement, trains, planes, cars, etc. It's often politically extreme, aligning with nationalism and war rhetoric, especially in early manifestos. And this here is this sculpture up here, which we mostly see Futurism as being more on the painting and like the 2D side, but this is a really popular Futurism sculpture by Umberto Bosciani. This is called Unique Forms of Continuity in Space, and it's done in 1913. So we see here this bronze figure's aerodynamic limbs and flowing shapes represent the human body fused with the energy and forward thrust of the modern machine. So these like little kind of shark fin looking things that we see kind of coming off of him are to represent the motion of him moving forward. And it is very abstract, it's very fragmented, but that sort of feeling of motion still exists. And then down here, this is one of my favorite Futurism paintings, and it's funny just because it's not, about any type of transportation at all. But these little dachshund's legs that are just like moving so, so fast, and you can tell through that fragmentation, and the body stays still because it's not moving like that. It's not, this rapid thing going back and forth. Same with the feet here. So this capturing of this motion, this like kind of, speed is really all what Futurism is about and trying to capture. All right, this is the last one I'm going to talk about in this video. I know it's going on a little bit longer than normal. This is Dadaism, and I really think this is the one that sort of really, really, really pushes into something that I keep saying it with every movement, but Dadaism is just totally out of left field. It's like nothing that's ever happened before it. It goes from 1916 to 1924, and it is known as anti-art and absurdity. So this is born in Zurich during World War I. Dada was a radical rejection of reason, logic, and bourgeoisie culture. And so this artist, Marcel Duchamp, is the one who sort of founds Dadaism. He presents a urinal as art, and Duchamp shattered expectations and forced viewers to question artistic authorship, intention, and value, a Dada hallmark. So the intention behind this, though, was that he was already sort of a well-known photographer and just like artist name in the art world. And so he had this ability to kind of bring this into the art world and not just be some person off the street trying to, make us think that a urinal is art. But yeah, he just essentially found this, brought it in. He didn't construct it or anything. This is just a real life urinal that you would see in a public bathroom. He brought it into the gallery, signed his name to it, put it on a pedestal, and he kind of just wanted people to be just appalled by it in a way. He thought that the art world had kind of got to a point of the kind of bourgeoisie culture that it was just so removed from everything else in society. And so this is just a sort of shock and also just like make fun of that culture. Artists believe, though, that kind of going back to the whole main ideas of Dadaism, artists believe the war was a result of rational systems gone mad. So art should be irrational, spontaneous, and provocative. So that was kind of their MO. It embraced nonsense, chance, performance, and ready-mades or everyday objects turned into art. The urinal here is a ready-made. It's like the first ready-made that existed. And the movement questioned the very definition of art, turning galleries into arenas of protest. So it was a lot of commotion going on. It wasn't just this very docile nature we had known in art galleries for so long. And it's just important to note also that Dada was anti-war, anti-elite, and anti-tradition, and became a precursor to surrealism and conceptual artwork. And so it's like whole intention is to be controversial and to be thought of as like not art. Even asked if when they were asked the Dada artist, they believed Dada to mean nothing, and so they were just sort of separating themselves as far as they possibly could from what had been done before, out of outrage, out of just disgust, and for where the world was at this point. So, we're going to stop here, and then in part two, I'm going to finish up with the second half of our movements. Surrealism is sort of a good place to kind of break into for a second part. So, I will see you guys then, and yeah, hope you enjoy.